A multitude of events shook the world in 2011 and will be remembered for years to come. A wave of revolution swept through the Arab world. It began in Tunisia when an unemployed graduate set himself on fire over confiscated fruits and vegetables. Uprisings spread to Egypt and Libya as protesters challenged and overturned oppressive regimes.
It started in Tunisia and then, of course, Egypt, Libya, Yemen, etc. It was a combination of people power and the year when social media really expressed itself as being able to make a difference by turning local protests into global protests.
Traditionally, a government would be able to shut down the phone system or shut down private broadcasters, and they'd be able to control the communications around a protest or an uprising. But now that places like Twitter and Facebook and other social media are so accessible, it turns into a big cat and mouse game with these governments.
With uprisings in Syria and Yemen, the Arab Spring may not be over yet and will continue to shape headlines in 2012.
So there's going to be some turbulent times ahead in terms of presenting a true democracy and rights for people.
On March 11, 2011, Japan was struck by a devastating 9.0 magnitude earthquake, which in turn triggered a deadly tsunami and a serious nuclear crisis.
You can't imagine a worse 1-2-3 punch in terms of a country absorbing a disaster like that.
When you see that water and you see how deep that water gets, how far inland it gets, and then you realize that it does as much damage coming back out as it did coming in. Really, the mind boggles when you really think about the scope of that disaster.
Canadians were instantly moved by this tragedy, and you could see that just in the way donations started immediately via the Red Cross and all the other aid agencies that take part in helping with recovery and rescue.
Social media played a big part here too. People were able to experience and see what was happening on the ground in Japan in real time. This sense that we're all one and this is happening right now, I think we were all affected by what we saw.
On May 2nd, almost 10 years after the attacks of September 11, 2001, Al-Qaeda chief Osama bin Laden was killed by a team of U.S. commandos in an assault on his secret compound in Pakistan.
Symbolically, he was the reason for the 9/11 attacks. There weren't many people in North America who weren't touched in some profound way by the attacks. So for many people, this was the closure of this decade-long hunt for this man who was responsible for such a profound tragedy in North America.
Protesters first occupied Wall Street on September 17th to vent their frustration with the global financial system, corporate greed, and inequality. The Occupy sentiment soon spread across borders, hitting multiple cities around the world.
Out of the States, it grew from, a discontent among the masses. We saw big banks getting bailed out, and still people were having their homes foreclosed upon. We see great disparities in wealth among the 99% compared to the 1%.
By November, most of the occupied sites in Canada had been closed down, but not without raising awareness of social injustice.
Governments around the world, not just in the States, have been so focused on cutting spending. The idea that there's something else that's important was not really being heard. I think the Occupy movement has made that hurt.
Violence shook the hockey world in 2011 with the Stanley Cup riots in Vancouver and the tragic deaths of 3 former NHL players. Following the Canucks' loss to the Boston Bruins in the final game of the Stanley Cup playoff on June 15th, rioting broke out in downtown Vancouver.
It instantly erased everything that the team had done up to that point. The fact that they had made it to the Stanley Cup finals, that they were so close to winning a Stanley Cup, and to see it all evaporate so fast and be replaced by those really indelible images of burning cars and people looting.
We have to be careful about, we say, oh, Vancouver's a bad city or hockey's a bad sport. We have to look at the underlying factors of why this happened. To me, there's a group of people who were going to riot no matter what happened. Then there were other people who got caught up in it. Then there were other people who just stood around and watched.
The hockey world received more sad news later in the year with the tragic deaths of 3 former NHL enforcers, highlighting the lasting harm that might be caused by the violent elements of the game.
It sent shockwaves through the hockey world, and I think it obviously opened up a lot of questions about the role of fighting in these 3 deaths.
For the hockey community, it brought us a lot closer together, and I think that we realized as a group that there's so much more to life, and I think we have to look at all those individuals playing the game and how important they are, not only as hockey players, but as fathers, as brothers, as uncles, as cousins, and as friends.
I don't know that you can link hockey to all 3 of these deaths or any of these 3 deaths directly, but it certainly makes us ask questions and look a little deeper at part of the game that a lot of us frankly enjoy.
From natural disasters to political and social upheaval around the world, These were some of the biggest events of 2011.